So the Ecomuseum itself is very well developed now. This is a screenshot from Flodden 1513, and if you Google Flodden 1513, you can go to this site and explore the Ecomuseum in detail. And each of the individual sites is there, and you can go to that and find out more about the Ecomuseum itself. But let's say a little bit more about the intangible heritage of Flodden, because I think this is also quite interesting. Particularly on the Scottish side of the border, there are what are still known as the border ridings. Because when the Scottish army moved south, they gathered together troops from the different towns as they rode along. So they brought out people who were coming, if you like, to defend their own territory. And this is a tradition that still is carried on. There's a craft tradition which is still very strong in the borders. There are festivals, there's poetry, and there's music and song. But the ridings, I think, are really interesting. And these are annual events which are celebrated in all these border towns. And they commemorate, really, the riding out of the local people to take part in the Battle of Flodden. They do then date back to the 14th century. And they, if you like, help us to celebrate the border town's history and traditions. And they take place in midsummer. And they involve hundreds of horses and riders. And basically what they do is ride around their territory, declaring this is ours, and we are going to defend it. Okay, so that's what it's about. And it's become, of course, much more than just riding around. It's now become a whole host of different ceremonies. So ceremonies, rides, entertainment, Scottish sports, all these things actually are incorporated into the idea of the so-called common ridings. And they're a great day out. And again, there's a homepage about these, which is linked into the Flodden Ecomuseum website. And each of these little rosettes here represents a different town in the Scottish border. So Coldstream, Kelso, Duns, Jedburgh, these are all little towns in the Scottish border. And they all have their own way of celebrating the common riding. So this is one taking place, and you can see there's usually a lot of drinking goes on. You can see it's typical Scottish summer weather. It's raining, it's miserable, but people are still having a good time. And people charge on their horses up the streets. And it's a very interesting cultural phenomenon. So a bit of intangible cultural heritage from Scotland, which is very, very closely linked to the idea of the Flodden Ecomuseum. There are various other things that happen. So this, in fact, was a craft fair which took place last year at another site in Coldstream, which is a little town on the Scottish borders. Come and see baskets, materials and knives made like those used by people at the time of the Battle of Flodden in 1513. Free exhibition. So craft skills are still being practiced as well. Flodden was commemorated in stories and also in poetry, particularly later on in the 18th and the 19th centuries. And probably the best known is Sir Walter Scott's poem, the Marmion, which includes a section on the Battle of Flodden. And I won't read these, but if you again Google poetry in Flodden, you can see that there's a whole host of intangible culture there embedded in the history of this one battle. And there's one particular song called Flowers of the Forest, which is based on a very ancient and very traditional Scottish folk tune. And it was actually written down in 1615 as Flowers of the Forest, but it's actually We don't know what the original words were at all for it, but a lady called Jean Eliot in 1727 actually used the tune and framed it as a lament for everyone who had died at the Battle of Flodden. So a lament to the deaths of James IV, of his nobles, and over 10,000 men. And these men were referred to as the flowers of the forest. And the best sort of rendering of it actually is in this YouTube link here. I haven't actually got that here, and I don't know whether this will work. It's been really sort of interesting, and I think there's been all sorts of benefits in developing Flodden Ecomuseum based on this memory of a battle. It has brought community pride. It's got people involved in thinking about their history and their heritage. It's led to the conservation of distinctiveness, if you like, the appreciation of things like the ridings. It is about memory and remembering and documentation. There have been restoration projects. We hope in future that there will be economic gains, because we hope that the Ecomuseum will attract more people into the border region. I think what you'll see is that it's a very sensitive approach to cultural tourism, and we're hearing always this word sustainability, and sustainable tourism comes into our language all the time. But I think this is probably a very good example of a sensitive and sustainable approach to cultural tourism. It has led to all sorts of networks being made in the borders which weren't there before, and particularly creating networks which cross the border between England and Scotland. And I think that has been really very important in that it's created a feeling of community which crosses that very traditional boundary. And that's been really important. Again, some of the key people who've been involved have in fact have made connections with other eco-museums worldwide, and particularly in Europe. in Italy and in Sweden, and they'd made visits there. So again, there is a sort of international connections being made, and those can only be good things as well. So all sorts of potential benefits that I think have come from this eco-museum development. And certainly in terms of safeguarding, which I think is what we're about, it's had a very beneficial effect. So that's Flodden, which is a project really that's come a long way in the last 3 years. Let's just have a quick look at a project which is beginning to develop. This is this island that I showed you off the coast of Northumberland called Lindisfarne, or Holy Island. And it's only an island twice a day. Twice a day it gets cut off by the tide. And people also get cut off by the tide, including tourists. And sometimes they try to get back and get stuck, okay? And people, the rescue services are always being called out to rescue people from the causeway of Holy Island. And here's a car in difficulty. This little building is the one place you can stop in the middle of the causeway if you're in real danger. And you have to climb out of your car and up into this little hut to stop being drowned. So an interesting place to visit. You have to time your visit very carefully to Holy Island. But very important because of its monastic heritage. It's a really important religious site for the English, and I think for Christianity in general. And the most important part really is the priory, which was built by Saint Aidan and used in time also by St. Cuthbert, both really important saints in the history of Christianity. So this is why many people come on this pilgrimage. And in fact, there is a pilgrimage which takes place here. You can actually walk over to Holy Island across the sand. And this is the route that people who come for a religious purpose often take. So they don't drive over in a car, but they walk across Holy Island sands to make this religious pilgrimage. So it's a very, very interesting place. It also has other things, other than being, if you like, this cradle of Christianity, this link with St. Aidan and St. Cuthbert. It has associations with what is called the Golden Age of Northumbria. And it was in this place that one of the most important relics in the British Museum, or the British Library actually, is located, which is the Lindsfarne Gospels, which were actually created on this island, and a wonderful illuminated manuscript, religious manuscript, which you can see on the right-hand side here. This is the Lindisfarne Gospel. It's also important in terms of landscape and biodiversity. So this orchid is actually only found on the island of Lindisfarne. The only place in the world it's found is on this island. It has a castle, which is managed by the National Trust. It has the priory, and very beautiful landscape and important biodiversity. So a really interesting place for many different reasons. It has very many stakeholders involved in conserving these different aspects of its heritage, which is why they decided some time ago, 2 years ago, that, in 2009, that they were going to make what they call the Holy Island Partnership. Now, this is a partnership between the organisations who are involved in looking after the heritage on the island. So the National Trust, English Heritage, English Nature, Natural England, the Northumberland County Council, huge numbers of organisations who are interested in the history and heritage assets of the island itself. And they needed some way of bringing together a strategy so that they could work together, rather than just looking after their own individual sites, that they could work together to be to do things, if you like, in a more cooperative way. So as I say here, the variety of natural and cultural resources requires the intervention of several national, regional, and local bodies. And they set themselves three primary aims: to have better visitor management, to give landscape protection and enhancement, and also develop community cohesion. So to bring the community together and get the community involved in its own heritage. And this, I think, has been done very, very successfully. And it's really interesting, this sort of intangible dimension to the island. And I found this actually, this quote here in a blog. Someone was blogging about their visits to Holy Island. And I really took this quote and have used it here. And it says, "You really can't capture Holy Island just with visual images. Holy Island is a mixture of ever-changing light and shade, fascinating views, an aura of peace, tranquility, and sanctity, an atmosphere and 101 intangible things. You have to go there and experience it to be able to appreciate it." So again, if you like, developing this idea, this link between the intangible and place, and I think that's really, really important. And as you've gathered, the most important intangible cultural heritage of Lindisfarne is its link to its religious significance. So the idea of the Lindisfarne Gospels, the presence of Saint Aidan and St Cuthbert, the ancient priory church, they've created a Lindisfarne Gospel garden, and there are also other things other heritage attractions on the island, because one of the things that the monastic community did was that they had their own brewery. They created a drink called mead from honey, and there is a little still there, the Lindisfarne mead factory on the island. And that again is a bit of intangible heritage which is still there and still cherished. But everything really comes down really to this religious significance of place. So as I say, this is a project which is still developing, and I've had a couple of meetings with the members of the Holy Island Partnership to talk to them about the potential of what the Ecomuseum offers. Because again, it's got this range of heritage sites, it's got a high level of community involvement. They're trying to create, if you like, again, sustainable tourism. So the Ecomuseum could be a way of bringing together the different sites. So the castle here, the priory, the religious aspects here is St Cuthbert, the visitor centre, the main street itself, and here is the Pilgrim's Way across the island, which is marked by these poles in the sand. And this is the quite adventurous and quite difficult route you have to take if you're going to be a pilgrim here. And my discussions with them have actually been really interesting, and they've said, well, these ideas, you know, we're implementing all these ecomuseum ideas. Do we have to call it an ecomuseum because we're not sure it will work? And so well, it doesn't really matter. You don't have to use the term. You know, what you're doing really is utilizing, without knowing it, really ecomuseum principles and delivering a really important project. And whether they will adopt the term Lindisfarne Ecomuseum or not, I don't know, but I don't really think it matters. The important thing is that they recognize that there are connections that can be made here, and that the island itself can be seen as a holistic resource and also interpreted in that way. The Ecomuseum can be used, if you like, to make connections for people and for visitors. Okay, so that's a little bit of what's happening in a very small part of the world. But I think, again, a reflection, if you like, is in that the intangible lies at this really local level. This is where intangible cultural heritage lives, in these places, in these very small places. And it's there really that we've got to celebrate them and safeguard them. Thank you.